take a step back, look at the end game that you're trying to fill.
Because by selling less, they get to produce that less even better. They get even better at selling that less at better margins than in a business. Focusing on less gives you more. Delegating functional ownership of an area of the business and ongoing responsibility means I really am building a business independent of me as the owner.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Well, I want to welcome you to another episode of The Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel. In this episode, I had the chance to sit down and talk with my good friend, Rich Wood. For those of you who don't know Rich, Rich is a business owner in his own right. He has a background in engineering, an aerospace engineer who's invented products and patented them. He's built technology companies. He's built other companies. And for the past many, many years, he's coached clients. Typically, the clients he coached will be anywhere on the low end from $5 to $10 million businesses, all the way up to coaching companies that are in the $100 to $500 million per year revenue range. Now, Rich and I in this interview, we're talking about a really interesting thing. I had planned to go one way with it, but he said something that was so good we went a completely different way, and it was a great interview because of that. We started talking about why less is more. One of the biggest mistakes that business owners make is they try to go too broad in their focus. Too broad in their choice of products or service, too broad in their choice of marketplaces, too broad in terms of what their vision for their company is. And we give an example, a case study that we build on in here. Actually, we give several, but one of them is a $6 million company that Rich coached, that he helped, that took him 20 years to go from 0 to 6 million. But just in a couple years after working with Rich, they were able to go from $6 to $60 million, not by doing more, but by refocusing their best energy, their best talent, their best attention, their best dollars and money on less, they were able to 10x that business in that period of time. With that said, I hope you have a great time watching and listening to this episode of The Business Coach. Well, Rich, welcome to The Business Coach. Thank you for coming back on to be part of the show. I really appreciate it. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, and thanks again for the opportunity. I love to do what I can to help the people move forward.
Yeah. Now, look, you've been doing business coaching for a long time, but this summer was a big deal for you. You had two occasions that happened this summer. Share the good news with our audience here real quick.
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting. It's probably been over the last several months. So the first thing is that my son got married and my daughter got married all in the last 6 months, and I moved from the West Coast to the East Coast, all in the same period of time. So it's been a lot of change in my life for sure. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, and I'm smiling. So I kind of look at it as you and some of the other good friends I have who have their kids are at a different age set, and your kids are, probably somewhere about 7 to 12 years older than my kids. And it's like I get a snapshot of what is coming down the pipe for me with that part as my kids finish up high school and then go off to college and those things. So you've been a great mentor for me in that respect. I want to just talk about this frame. So as business coaches, we get to see a lot of client situations, and I liken it this way. I think the two of us are reasonably intelligent men, but we're not necessarily brilliant. Maybe you're brilliant, I'm not. But one of the things I think we take advantage of is the fact that we're the average business owner who runs a company. Let's say it's $1 million a year revenue company or even a $50 million a year revenue company. They might have done 5 or 6 companies over their lifetime. And so they have 5 or 6 businesses worth of experience. But you and I, we get to work with several hundred companies over time, or several thousand companies. And that means that we get to learn not just from our 5 or 6 companies that we've done ourselves or still own, right, but we learn from all the good, bad, and ugly of our clients' work and what actually works in the laboratory of the real world for their companies. Is that a fair way of saying that?
Yeah, I think it's a totally fair way of saying it.
So where I want to go today is I want to ask you today, what's a common business challenge that you watch some of your clients struggle with? And we're going to use that as a place to springboard from, giving our audience some concrete ways that they can deal with those challenges or preempt those challenges, but start off by framing what's one common struggle that you see that happens again and again with business owners that you work with.
So the one common struggle, and I want to, I know we want to limit it to one, but there's really two that I think are important. And the first one is what I call the Field of Dreams challenge, which is we put a product or a service out to market, and we think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and we expect that the market is going to come in and flood us with money to buy our product or service. The other challenge that I see a lot of businesses work with is that they come into the business process not thinking about the business plan, not having a strategic roadmap for where their business is going. And I think that that's a challenge that lends itself to significant business impact.
Let's start with the second one first. We're going to unpack that first. So give me an example of an owner, change the identifying things. We don't want to put anyone on the spot with that, but give us an example of a real person, a real business that and lay out, their lack of having a strategic plan for themselves and what it cost them. And then we'll get into how did you coach them to have that plan?
Right.
How did it solve that part? And how can we look at what we then can do to take that same solution and apply it to our business? So start with giving us lay the facts out on the ground with changing enough that we can never identify the person.
Yeah, so I will say that there's one company that I worked with several years ago that was a company that had a product line that was essential oils. And they had a product line that had roughly 26, 28 different products within their product line. So they had a very large product line, and their expectation was these essential oils are the greatest thing out there, and that everybody's going to want them. So I'm just going to develop them, and I'm going to produce them, and I'm going to put them out into the market online, and everybody's going to want to buy them. So they didn't actually think it through about how to strategically move their product into the market. They didn't think clearly about how to price the product. They didn't think about how to position the product in the marketplace. They had no fundamental plan, a strategic roadmap to get the product out there to deliver it to the marketplace and then to expand their business.
Okay, well, let's go back into this for a second. So, for example, you mentioned that they hadn't given a thought. They had this line of what they thought was really quite a high quality product, right. But they didn't have a plan for how they were going to, you said sell, price, position. I'm going to flip that of the order there. So they didn't know how they were going to position it. How they position it's going to help them with their plan to sell it. And how they position and how they sell it's going to dictate at what price they sell it. So I'm going to kind of flip it on its head. And I know my role here is to kind of help take the kernels of what you've got and just to reposition them slightly, sure, because it's really useful there. So I'm curious about when you talk about position, like whenever I've shared with clients about positioning, I always try to think about how do I dumb it down? I call it the parking lot theory of positioning a product or a service. I look at that. If someone else is parked in a parking space, it's really hard for me to move their car. Someday I'll tell you about how my friends in the Maui community, when I was teaching a workshop, Rich, they took I had my trailer with me. My wife and I were going cross country, and we took a casita trailer with us. And they found a way to unhook it such a way that they actually rolled it somewhere else in the parking lot. And they freaked my wife out, freaked me out. We thought this thing had been stolen. They're laughing. So unless it's got like easy to move it over, and generally speaking, if another product or service owns a position in the minds of a market, hard to move. And a position is really the intersection of three things, right? What's something that your product does that it does exceptionally well, right? What's something that your market values quite highly, and what's unoccupied? So it's how I position myself has got to be something I'm very good at. My product or my service really has as a strength. It's got to be something that the market values, but it's also got to be something that no clear winner dominates that parking space already in the minds of a customer. Like it would be really difficult for me to come into a world where, for example, Walmart has dominated the low cost retailer. That's a really hard space for anyone to come in and say we're less than Walmart with that. They own that parking space for Target's not going to push them out of the way for that. They might come over with design or quality as a parking space, but Walmart owns that one. So that's positioning. Any other comments you have about positioning a product? That's one kind of tip that I would give to someone. What else would you give to someone as a tip or a suggestion to position their product or service in the marketplace?
Right. And I agree with your flipping of the things, and I agree with the priorities. So positioning a product is the problem I see with a lot of clients is they don't understand what the needs of the customer is that they're trying to fulfill a product with. They don't understand what the requirement is of the marketplace. They don't understand what the need is. And therefore they don't have a product that fits clearly into a well-defined niche or fills a need in the marketplace. And that opens them up to a variety of different problems that we can discuss.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. I call that fuzzy products or fuzzy services. David, I mean, we have the best product in the world, the best service. It does all these things. This is the contractor who says, oh yeah, we can do an addition. We can do a whole new home build. Oh, we can do siding. We can do roofing. And they wonder, why am I only making $2 or $3 million of revenue a year when, Juan down the road who does just siding does 15 million. I do more than him and he sells 5 times more. How could that be? And you nailed it on the head. Would I try to be too many things in the marketplace? If I don't make it easy for someone to put their hands on what I do, it's really hard, especially in acquiring new customers or new clients. It's really hard to get that early new customer. So I think that's really sage. What about the strategy to sell? Like, what did you tell these people with their essential oils about either their positioning or their strategy to sell? What was some of the advice you gave to them?
Well, the advice that I gave them was take a step back and look at the end game that you're trying to fill. Look at the end game that you're trying to create. What's the end map that you're trying to get to? So start with the end in sight and then move backwards from there, because starting with the end tells me what is my product, what need is my product fulfilling, what services is my product providing, and then I go forward from there to understand how I position that in the market, how I get that into the market, what my competitive space looks like, what my discriminators are, all of those things. So start with the end in mind and then build a strategic roadmap from the end to where you are today to move the product forward into the market.
Yeah, I'm curious. What did they end up positioning themselves? And I'll give an example for one of our clients jointly. We have a client that runs a software business that they sell software to banks, specifically to the commercial lending arm of banks.
Right.
And in their world, there are other software tools that banks can use to basically use for the process of how software is done. But our client, they have a patent on a piece of technology that is the heart of what they do. Basically, what they're selling is the ease of user experience, because most times in a commercial loan situation, the internal bank wants to communicate through a software tool, but because it's also with outside attorneys and outside borrowers and outside appraisers and outside environmental inspectors, what happens is that everything ends up getting turned into email, because that's what these other third parties are used to using.
Right.
And so all the software that could make them more efficient is just so horrible. So from a user experience, that they've created a way that they use technology, AI, et cetera, to make it work better so that these outside parties come into the fold of that internal software. So their parking space is, look, there are other softwares that will make you more efficient, but notice how little it's getting used. The reasons it's not getting used is because your staff finds it's very difficult because these third parties suck them out of that. And so our software is such a much easier user experience to pull those outside people into this platform, such that you'll find that the software that you pay for, people will actually use the darn thing. Right. And it was a brilliant way of positioning. It knew that they weren't selling the efficiency because they had competitors that really owned those parking spaces. But they got to point out why, even though their competitors had good software, because of the way the market worked with these third parties sucking people out of it and into email, out of the software into email, that was their entry point for this. I'm curious, how did you position, or how did you help your client in this case position with the essential oils?
Well, what we ended up doing was we took their inventory of 26, their product line of 26, 28 different products, and we focused it on the top 5 that were generating real margin. And then within the top 5, we picked one that was their flagship product that would provide market entry and brand building and brand awareness with the business that we could position and then leverage the positioning of the core product with the other products. But we eliminated roughly 75 or 80% of their product line, focused on the top 5 that were making their money, and then built brand awareness around the one that was targeted specifically to a market need that fulfilled a very specific element that was missing in the market that would allow us to generate high sales volume that would finance the business moving forward. But the other interesting thing about this was that they treated the business as a hobby, not as a business, which I think is another big challenge that a lot of business owners run into. So we focused on narrowing the focus of the product line to a market need with a line product that was representing the brand that everything else was built upon. So we targeted the product into the marketplace with a very specific roadmap of marketing and advertising and sales.
You know, as I hear you say that, that's fantastic. I want to call 2 things out that you did that I thought were really, really smart. One was we go back to the concentration, right? Based off of not just on margin, but simplifying how we have to inventory, cash tied up, et cetera. So sometimes by offering less, we actually sell more, which is counterintuitive. And I find so many business people, typically they get stuck around the $1 to $2 million a year range, where they think, if I want to sell more, I need to offer more. Yet when I look at our clients that have businesses that are doing 10, 20, $50 million a year or more in revenue, almost invariably they specialize, they've niched down, because by selling less, they get to produce that less even better. They get even better at selling that less at better margins, and it just kind of has this big escalation effect. The second one I want to point out, you said, and I loved it, you called it, they picked their flagship. Well, I'll often call it the gateway product. What's the one product or one service that if I sell that, it leads to the long-term, the richest client or customer relationship both ways. I serve the customer or client great, I make the most money. And I focus on that gateway product or service. You talked about this one particular oil that had been matched to a market need that was not being met. In other words, marked to an open parking space.
Correct.
And it sells through all the others. And I thought that was really smart. I wanted to call that out. Any other quick comment on that before I go to another question for you? This is good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a textbook application of some of the business principles that we talk about inside of our program with our coaching team. And the beauty of that is that not only did it allow them to run their business more profitably, it allowed them to narrow the focus of what they were doing with their advertising and sales product. It helped them get into markets, big brand retailers, with one flagship product that we could then pull in the other ones as ancillary product offerings. So it allowed us to more effectively and efficiently spend the advertising and marketing dollars that they had, that generated higher revenue with higher margins. So it had this multiplier effect on decreasing operating costs and expenses and increasing gross profit and increasing sales. So it wasn't, the strategy led them down a path of strengthening the business, but also increasing the operational efficiency of what they were selling and how they were selling it.
You know, as I hear you say that, I'm going to come back to this concept of less is more. And I want you to think about 1 or 2 client stories around this, because I just want to come back here. So I'm going to share quickly 2 stories around this idea that in a business, focusing on less gives you more. And so we had a client that we have worked with now for, I want to say close to 14 or 15 years, Rich. And he originally, when we started working with him, he owned a flooring company and he owned a fireplace company. They were about equal in terms of revenue. As we started coaching with him, they were doing about maybe combined just a bit shy of $2 million a year. The question for him was, well, tell me, which business do you have better margins on? He would say the fireplace business by far. Okay. Which one is easier to sell? Less competition. The fireplace. We get people who drive from 3 or 4 hours to come to our showroom versus the flooring company. There's flooring companies in every corner. Okay, so better margins, less competition, so easier to sell. And by the way, which one gives you better cash flow? I knew the answer, Rich. He collected half the money for the fireplace sale up front and the other half upon installation. On the flooring side, he would be lucky to get paid within 60 to 90 days afterwards, especially for his commercial contracts. Flooring is a tough, ruthless business, really hard to get your collections. I'm like, well, you tell me, based on this here, where do you want to put your attention? He's like, well, I never thought of that way, David. And so he kept this flooring business, but he didn't put his best people on it. He shifted his best attention, which was him and a couple of staff members, to fireplace. He grew fireplace roughly 3 times more. He let flooring not die, but kind of fade away in its own way. Eventually he closed it down because it wasn't worth even doing it. But then he had another business line they started in parallel that was even better than fireplace. And so slowly he shrunk what he offered in fireplace to just the most richly profitable pieces, put more effort over here. And by the time he was done, he was making close to 8 times the amount of profit that he was from where he started that original process 14 years prior. And he was working, probably 50 to 60% less than what he used to work originally. He was working 70 to 80 hours up front, and he's working today probably closer to 25 to 30 hours. So to our audience out there, it's not about doing more. Doing more means you have to work harder to continue to do more. How do we focus on the product or service lines, for example, in our example here, that let us do less, but the less we do is more richly rewarded? And we find that by focusing on less in a marketplace, the marketplace wants more of that narrower focus from us because they understand it. And we get better at selling it. And we get better at delivering at it. The better we sell it, the better we deliver at it, the better we can continue to sell more of it. The more we sell of it, the better we get to deliver it. The better we deliver it, the more we sell of it, the more we're able to sell of it. It's this virtuous cycle. I'm curious, give us an example, then I'll share one more with a technical business.
So I'll give you a different example that was with another company that I worked with for a while. Now, it was a company that was in the sports manufacturing segment of the business. So the interesting thing with that business was originally it was manufacturing sports product for a lot of the major brands that are out there in the U.S. marketplace and the world marketplace. And the issue for them was not just on selling a product, but building a brand and building and strengthening the brand of the product through distribution. They thought initially that they were in the manufacturing business, but the reality was that they were actually in the logistics business. So the business had a very large manufacturing footprint, Pacific Rim, Asia, in Europe, and in the United States. And we took that business from a $6 million a year revenue-based business. We increased it by tenfold. We sold the business twice in the period of time that I was working with them because we migrated the business from being a product-oriented manufacturing business to being a logistics brand development business. So again, it was narrowing the focus. It was clearly understanding what business are we in, what service are we providing, and how we can effectively leverage that across a broader base by narrowing the focus of what it is we're really doing.
Isn't that crazy? So going back to the example you just gave here, so common that a business owner says, well, of course I'm in business X. This is what my business is. And what they don't realize is they've given a generic, larger kind of parking space for it, or larger basket for it. And the market values that at X. But there's a piece inside there that they do. In your case, it was the example of logistics and the brand development that if we could pull that out and do just that, the market values at 3X, 5X, 10X.
Exactly.
And again, it comes back to this theme that less is more. And I love the story you just shared. I guess I'm gonna share a story here, but in a moment I want to ask you the question of how did you get that client to hear it? Because I'm going to give another example here. Go ahead and answer it then if you've got it. Go ahead and answer. How do you get them to hear that? Because so many business people, especially the owners, they say, I've been doing it this way for a decade, David. It works, subtext, well enough that they're scared of rocking the boat. How did you get them to see that they could go from 6 million a year to 60 million a year not by spreading further wide, but by narrowing their focus there? How did you get them to see it?
So I think that the simplest way, and this is an example of, I've been doing it this way for 20 years. I'm not going to change. So the way that I got the client to see the bigger picture, if you will, was expanding their level of awareness about what they can do, but more importantly, keeping the picture simple and sweet about what the roadmap looked like. So the idea was keep it simple, keep it narrow, keep it focused, but communicate, here's where we can go and here's how we can get there. These are the changes that we need to make. So the idea was to give the vision to the business owner about where we can go, open up their mind and their awareness about what can be done, and then give them a very, very basic, simple roadmap in simple terms that they could integrate and grab onto and hold on to as we rolled out the strategy over the next several years.
So I'm hearing a clear vision of it. I'm hearing giving them a simple picture, not complicating it. I'm hearing that we have to acknowledge that they have a way that they've done it that has worked. And we have to honor that, but at the same time ask, are they satisfied that they want to stay with this? Because what you essentially said is it took them 20 years to get to $6 million a year, but then over the next several years, they 10x the business with that part of it. So if they're satisfied at 6 million and don't want the change, okay, well, then they're probably not going to be the client for you. But if they're willing to go and have more, and they have a picture of what will get them the more, and that picture is simple, they'll go for it. I'm thinking for this client here with the fireplace side, like Rich, for example, when we started looking at even just his fireplace business, I said, do a quick analysis of your products that you sold. Just look at what you sold. You carry 1,000 different products in your store. I'm going to bet you some money. This is the way I would frame it to a client. I'll bet you some money. I'll bet you that you've got 10 to 20% of your products that are responsible for probably 70 to 80% of your profit, not your sales necessarily, but of your profit. And if you show, and he looked at it and he's like, oh my God, David, it's 10% of my products gave him 80% of his profit. And the opposite was he had half his products that gave him less than 10%. I said, you've told me that the hardest thing for you is it takes you 6 to 12 months to train a new salesperson to know how to sell 1,000 products. I said, why don't we, and as soon as I said that, he's like, Doug, got it. We get rid of half our products immediately. We focus the training on this 20 to 50 products initially to sell, and I can have them selling in 30 days, which you and I would go, of course, but they have to see it cleanly there. Any other tips for a business owner? Because sometimes it's not just convincing the owner of this, but they have staff members who say, well, we've done it this way all of our lives. You're changing on us now. Any other tips or suggestions where you could coach a business owner to help get their staff to buy into these changes that you're suggesting, Rich?
Yeah. So one of the challenges is creating a level of awareness, giving that vision to the business owner so that they can see what the future could hold if we do some things differently. The other thing is to convince and communicate to the owner that you have to bring your team along with you in sharing that vision and sharing the roadmap and having shared ownership in the outcome of implementation. But recognizing as the business owner that you can't do it yourself. You have to have strategic depth inside of the business to fulfill the services or to fulfill or create the products and get them to market. So you can't do it alone. You need to have a team, and you need to have strong, sound leadership of that team, moving them in lockstep towards a fundamental vision that's a shared vision of where we as a company can go if we just do these right things and narrow the focus.
Yes, I'm so with you on that, Rich. Exactly. And I love the way you talk about how do we get the owners I see sometimes, especially on the smaller clients, under 5 million a year in revenue, they sometimes get into a mode of, I tell people what to do, where it's command control, where I'm the one directing everybody, versus how can I give them some of the reasons behind, sometimes a little bit of extra sharing, a little bit extra time to bring people along with you. goes so far to alleviate anxiety, which now means I get the best of my people as I'm doing it. I love it. I've got one last question as we bring today to a close here, Rich. When you think of the clients you've worked with, at the beginning of that relationship with you as their coach, they were a little scared, a little unsure. Can I really do that? Can I really take my $6 million business and make it $60 million? Can I take my $2 million business and make it a $12 or a $22 million business? What would you say to the business owner who's a little bit scared of doing this right now? This idea of them, like, is this really possible for me to take my business that's working on one level, but to take it to the next level? What would you say to them, Rich?
Yeah, so my personality is very much more oriented towards taking risks, jumping off the cliff, and experiencing what happens afterwards. But I think that the way that I make this a doable exercise for the clients that I work with is, I communicate that we if we're going to grow our business and we want to improve our business and our lives and the lives of the people that we have, that sometimes we just have to embrace the uncertainties that we have, to go forward in embracing those uncertainties, moving forward with risk in mind, but to develop a plan, understand where you're going, to have a roadmap to get there, and to have a team behind you that the risk is there. It's inherent in anything that we do, walking out the door, walking off the curb, driving our car, whatever. So embrace the risk. You can't avoid risk, but understand that it's very doable, and it's very fun to go down this kind of path to grow the business and to get a team of people behind you to move forward in lockstep. And when you get to the end and you've succeeded in what you set out to accomplish, all of the effort and all of the work and all of the anxiety that you had going into it just kind of melts away.
I think it's fantastic advice. I was thinking, as you're saying, I was jotting a few notes down to myself, and what came to mind for me, Rich, was something similar but slightly different. It came to my mind, which was, to the doctor who says, I can see how the manufacturer can do this in their business, but I don't see how it's possible for me, running a 3-clinic medical practice. And then the manufacturer says, well, I can see how the IT services company could do it, but I don't see how I as a manufacturer can do this stuff. Right. Or the IT services company then says, I can see how the medical practice can do it, but I don't see how I can do it. And what I tell them is I say, look, it is absolutely doable because at least one other business in your industry that's done it. Of course you can. But the place to start with is, how can I just make the decision, just this decision, that I'm going to build this business over time to be more independent of me, to build a business versus just owning a job. And that mindset, once I make that change in an owner, now a whole host of other things become automatic. If I'm not just building, my business that's just around me, that means that when I do my positioning, or when I look at for how I'm doing sales, or if I look at how I'm doing operations, I ask the question, who else can do this? And what are the systems we can put into place that now gives a foundation behind it? And I start building a culture that says, how can I, the owner, give functional ownership of ongoing responsibilities to other people versus delegate, just task. Taskmasters means I, the owner, am stuck. Delegating functional ownership of an area of the business and ongoing responsibility means I really am building a business independent of me as the owner. Rich, thank you for spending the last, half an hour, 40 minutes with us on The Business Coach. As always, it's always fun to talk with you. And congratulations on both your kids getting married this summer.
Thank you.
That is huge.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share what we've got going here. So thanks very much, David.
Bye-bye.